Today you're going to learn about how the Cold War comes to an end. As you can see on here, this is President Ronald Reagan, the US president at the time when the Cold War was winding down, and then Mikhail Gorbachev on the right there, president of the Soviet Union, and these two are very important. Here's what you're going to do for your notes today while you watch this video. You're going to choose to do them on page 10 if you've got space open there, or you can do them on page 2, which is the back side of the cover, depending on what style you like to lay them out in. If you like Cornell notes, page 10 will be good for you, or if you have page 9 empty, you could use that as well. Or if you like a different layout, then page 2 will be the best. So when setting this up, your notes are going to have 4 headings. So there are 4 main topics in the slides: leaders that helped bring the Cold War to an end, the fall of the Berlin Wall, the fall of the Soviet Union, and then the costs of the Cold War. So when you're setting up your information, those are the 4 headings you're going to use. It might look like this. If you use page 10, you'll put the headings, those 4 headings as you come to them on the left side, and then you'll put the notes in the right. Or if you're using page 2, you could set it up like you see here, end of the Cold War in the middle, and then those 4 headings: leaders, the fall of the Berlin Wall, fall of the Soviet Union, and the costs, and then you'd put the extra information from the notes around the spokes, if that's the way you like to do so. Okay, so pause if you need to get those things set up and get to your pages, get those headings written if you need them, and then start when you're ready to start listening and writing. Okay, so the leaders that helped bring the Cold War to an end. You see Ronald Reagan here on the left in the picture and Mikhail Gorbachev on the right. These are the 2 main leaders that really brought the negotiations between the 2 superpowers, brought them to the negotiating table. So Ronald Reagan, he and Gorbachev held 5 summit meetings. They called them summit meetings when they met to improve relations between the 2 and talk about how they could work things out. Reagan is famous for saying, "Mr. Gorbachev, tear down this wall," in reference to the Berlin Wall. And he really worked at reducing nuclear weapons between the 2. They had lots of talks about trying to dismantle and get rid of some of the nuclear weapons. All right, Mikhail Gorbachev was the Soviet Union president near the end of the Cold War. He introduced the idea of glasnost to the Soviet Union, which means openness to say and do what you want. Freedom of speech was not something that the Soviet Union allowed before this. Freedom of the press, a lot of the freedoms that we've had for hundreds of years, was not something that they allowed the people of the Soviet Union to do. And then he wanted to end communism as their economic system in the Soviet Union. Another leader was George H.W. Bush. After Reagan left office, George H.W. Bush came into office, and then he negotiated with Gorbachev, as you can see there in the background of this picture. This was the 2 of them at the Malta Summit in December of 1989, and at that important meeting, they declared that the Cold War was over. This was in December of 1989. All right, your next topic is the fall of the Berlin Wall. So you can see here a couple pictures when the Berlin Wall came down and when people started actually physically tearing it down. We're going to watch a real quick video about as the wall was coming down. Your notes will be on the next slide, but you should watch this.
As soon as the Berlin Wall was constructed, people protested for it to come down. Thousands rallied against its existence, with some even being arrested and imprisoned. John F. Kennedy, President of the United States of America, showed his support to West Berliners in his famous Ich bin ein Berliner speech of 1963. But there would be no clear step towards the reunification of Germany so long as the Western powers and the Soviet Union were in a standoff with each other. Border relations improved over the next 2 decades, allowing people to travel from east to west, but on a highly restricted basis. The late 1980s marked a shift. In 1987, American President Ronald Reagan called Soviet Premier Mikhail Gorbachev to tear down this wall. And 2 years later, his successor, George H.W. Bush pleaded for this again, asking for glasnost, or openness, to be brought to East Berlin. From September 1989, tens of thousands of East German residents gathered in weekly peaceful marches known as the Monday demonstrations. They chanted, "Down with the wall," and protested against the political regime of the Socialist Unity Party, known as the SED. There was a clear message. They wanted free elections, the formation of opposition groups, and the freedom to travel. By November, attendance at these marches had swelled to nearly 500,000. On the 9th of November 1989, Gunter Schabowski, spokesperson for the SED, mistakenly announced at a live press conference that the German Democratic Republic border was open, effective immediately. This caused a media frenzy, and a newsflash was broadcast on TV and radio: GDR opens border. Within 2 hours, hundreds of people were gathered at checkpoints, much to the surprise of the border guards, who, after some initial restraint, allowed a steady flow to pass through. The first checkpoint to open was here on Bornholmer Strasse, where people crossed over the Bosebrücke Bridge behind me. The Berlin Wall had officially fallen, and Germany changed forever overnight. In the early hours of the 10th of November 1989, thousands of people from both sides of the border gathered here at the iconic Brandenburg Gate. They stood on top of the Berlin Wall to celebrate the first step in reunification. Some chiseled away at the structure to take pieces as souvenirs, making them known as wall peckers. On the 31st of December 1989, 500,000 people from East and West Berlin returned to this spot to celebrate New Year's Eve together for the first time since the construction of the wall. In October the following year, the German Democratic Republic dissolved and Germany was unified. The dissolution of the Soviet Union soon followed in 1991, officially bringing the Cold War to an end.
Okay, here are the notes that you will need from what the video told us. So pause the video if you need. The people gathered peacefully in September of 1989 in Monday demonstrations to protest for free passage and elections. It was announced accidentally on November 9, 1989, that the wall was open, and people flooded to the checkpoints and the border guards let them through, and then people started tearing down the wall. All right, your next topic is the fall of the Soviet Union. So we're to the third of the four topics. November 9, 1989. Oh, that should say that the Berlin Wall fell. December 1989, the Cold War was declared over by Bush and Gorbachev. Then in October of 1990, Germany was reunified. And then while some of this is going on from 1988 to 1991, there were countries that started to declare their independence from Soviet Union, areas on the south and on the west of the Soviet Union that they had claimed. And then December of 1991, Gorbachev resigns and Boris Yeltsin became the president of Russia. Take a look at the map here to better understand the new countries being formed. These in yellow that you see along the sides here were parts of the Soviet Union that had all been part of the Soviet Union. And then when they, starting in 1988 through 1991, they all started to declare their independence from the Soviet Union. They became their own countries instead of being a part. So those include Estonia, Latvia, Lithuania, Belarus, Ukraine, and Moldova, Georgia, Armenia, and Azerbaijan, Kazakhstan, Uzbekistan, Turkmenistan, Tajikistan, and Kyrgyzstan. So those were all countries that had been a part of the Soviet Union, and now we have independent countries and Russia. So we go back to using the term Russia. All right, the last topic is the costs of the Cold War, and you'll get some notes after you watch this video.
After World War II, humanity went from a global military confrontation to another type of war called a Cold War instead of transitioning to a peacetime economy. Specifically, to a conflict which didn't involve direct military confrontations between the main participants, but rather an extensive arms race, continuous tensions, and occasional proxy wars. Ideologically speaking, it was a battle between Marxism and capitalism. Lasting until the dissolution of the USSR on the 26th of December 1991, the Cold War was long and extremely expensive. Over the entire Cold War period, U.S. military purchases amounted to roughly $17 trillion of today's dollars, and while reliable figures for the USSR are hard to come by, they've most likely spent less in nominal terms, but more as a percentage of their gross national product. In the end, the USSR collapsed under its own weight, as their over-centralized planning just didn't work. Collective farming was such a failure that the once powerful food exporter became a significant food importer. Industrial production and innovation suffered due to rigidity, and Russia went from being the first nation to send a satellite to space in 1957 to being surpassed by Japan and Germany, who had lost World War II. At its high point in 1969, the USSR represented 14.31% of the world's economy, but by the year of its dissolution, it had collapsed all the way down to 3.58%. Comparatively, the U.S. represented 28.69% of the world's economy at its highest point, and never fell under 20%. The end of the Cold War ultimately proved that military might alone is just not enough.
Okay, so this is what the video told us. To the United States, some of the costs, they spent an estimated $17 trillion in today's dollars. The U.S. stayed a stable part of the world economy, though. And the Soviet Union, they spent less than the U.S., but it was a higher percentage of their money. They had been a food exporter, but became a food importer, meaning they had to buy food from other nations, and their industries greatly suffered. And then a couple other things, thinking about what we've learned, some more costs, and this is some of the monetary costs or the money cost as well, but nuclear weapon stockpiles were sitting around after at the end of the Cold War. They were trying to scale back and reduce the numbers, but we do have nuclear weapons. And there were lives lost trying to stop communism in wars and in proxy wars, which are wars that were not directly between the Soviet Union and the United States, but they were triggered by both powers. And then finally, the fear of nuclear attack and the money spent preparing for it would be other costs. All right, those are your notes. You should go back and pause wherever you need to, but you are complete.